Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome. We missed you all dearly. Before I start, allow me to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of our nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Allow me to introduce today a very special guest, Richard Fidler. I'm sure a lot of you know Richard as an ABC presenter and writer, but I have to say most of us perhaps did not know that Richard is a friend of Czech Republic, our country and our culture. If you haven't read this book before, please do so, because it's a lovely book, not just on the history of our country, but it also says a lot about our hearts, minds, and soul. Thank you, Richard, for doing this. So, whom could we wish for to introduce the movie tonight than a radio presenter who has been interviewing politicians, artists, a lot of celebrities, and who should or could present the movie tonight together with our other secret guest, and that is the director of the movie, James Sueur, who is online in the US. And as miracles do happen, I can invite Richard to the floor and just start. Thank you very much and enjoy the night.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Dobry den, dobry večer. Ahoy! I'm sure I pronounced every one of those words wrong, but I'll plunge on ahead nonetheless. The reason I wrote a book about Prague is that I went there for the first time in the aftermath of the Velvet Revolution, the astonishing event that's at the heart of the film you're about to see. I arrived in Prague in early January 1990. Václav Havel had been just inaugurated, just days earlier, as president of this suddenly enchanted kingdom. After 4 decades of communism, Prague was grimy, there was scaffolding everywhere, bits of it were falling off and endangering passers-by in the street, but it was still achingly beautiful. It was the loveliest and most enigmatic city I'd ever seen. And being there, in that joyous revolutionary moments, was one of the most exciting experiences of my life. I never forgot it and kept dreaming about Prague and still keep dreaming about it ever since that time. Despite the language barrier, I had about 5 to 6 words of Czech, and about 4 of those were pivo. And people were incredibly kind and welcoming, and I experienced that kind of glorious egalitarian Czech conviviality. The only people I found to be rude were the desk staff at the Grand Hotel Europa where I was staying, and I only later, of course, realised they were all, employed by the secret police, by the STB. The desk staff were so incredibly rude. One woman in particular, that my girlfriend at the time and I thought we'd actually invent reasons to talk to her because she was so entertainingly rude. And I went to her one day, and she had this one of those tightly permed hair, heavy eyelashes, and she just looked at me like that every time I approached her. And I said, good morning. Can I make an international phone call from the hotel? And she said, it's completely impossible to do such a thing. And then I said, is it possible to make an international phone call anywhere in the city? And she said, you think I spend all my time finding out such things for people like you? Right. She was so much fun. Fortunately, she was the rare exception to all that, because the people of Prague in that season of political miracles were the happiest people in Europe. And the city was like a giant, rolling, exciting, ongoing party. Prague had awakened from a long nightmare of living under the thumb of cruel and arbitrary power, where, as President Havel said in his inauguration speech, his New Year's speech, people have become too used to thinking one thing and saying another. Václav Havel had always recoiled from slogans and cliches, but his people had endured so much cynical nonsense from their leaders, and he did grasp the need in that moment for some words that would unite them and raise their moral expectations. And so, in the form of, or taking his words from Jan Hus, the great Czech martyr, he coined the phrase, "Truth and love must defeat hatred and lies." And the phrase seemed to catch on. There was one night at that time, I was walking home late through the Old Town Square with my girlfriend, and it was completely empty. It was quite late at night, and it was one of those kind of eerily, gorgeously still winter's night in the Old Town Square. And it was completely empty, except for a small group of students who were standing just on the corner, just on the edge of the Old Town Square near Melantrakova Street, and they were standing around an open brazier, and they were making mulled wine, and they gestured for us to come and join them. They had no English, we had very, very little Czech, and they were so cold, they were like wearing every item of clothing they seemed to own just to keep warm, but they were so welcoming. And they gave us both a cup of mulled wine, and one of them raised his cup and said to me, "Pravda a laska," truth and love. And I knew what that meant. And I said it back to him, truth and love. No city in the world has ever made me feel the way Prague made me feel at that time. We were standing there in that incredible spot with the astrological clock behind us, that beautiful medieval masterpiece. The house at the minute, just to our left, covered with that beautiful sgraffito images where Franz Kafka spent much of his boyhood. It was a completely unforgettable moment. At a time when authoritarianism is on the rise once more in this world, we keep talking about this all the time in the media, of course, I think to watch this film, it's good to be reminded of that moment in 1989 when the people of Czechoslovakia won back their democracy that had been built by Tomáš Masaryk, torn down by Adolf Hitler, and again by Joseph Stalin, and rebuilt by them, the people, in 1989. It is my great pleasure now to introduce you to the director of The Art of Dissent, who is joining us all the way from Lincoln, Nebraska in the United States. It's the middle of the night over there. Ladies and gentlemen, give a please warm welcome on the screen to Professor James Sueur. Hey James, you look amazing at the moment. They're pajamas you're wearing right now, aren't they? Is that your sexy black silk pajamas? We don't have you on any sound. We can't hear you, James. I'm sorry. Turn your sound on. It's one of those classic Zoom. We've all been through this, haven't we? We're not hearing your voice. I did ask James, since it was the middle of the night. I can hear you now. That's good.
You wouldn't have wanted to hear. You would not have wanted to hear what I just said. Hello, Australia. I want to say hello.
James, what time is it in the morning over there?
It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning. So, and I've been getting teary-eyed just watching everyone come into the auditorium, to tell you the truth. And when I saw Elena walk by the camera, somebody who's very dear to me, I just a tear came to my eye because I really wish I could be there with you.
You're an historian living in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're both a long way from Prague here. How did you become interested in Václav Havel and the art of dissent as he's practiced it?
Well, as you'll see in the movie, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts when the Velvet Revolution was going, well, just about to happen, and I was going to the University of Chicago. I was just leaving Harvard to go to Chicago for my PhD, and I started my PhD in history in 1989. And if you're going to do a PhD in history, that's a good year to start. Because it kind of set the moment, sorry, I'm kind of a little tired. It set up how I understand history because, in your book, Richard, you talk about the idea of 1989, if it were inevitable, then it wouldn't be such a miracle, right? And so I started to kind of pay attention to Václav Havel and then spent some time in Germany in 1990. And I started to begin to understand Havel as a literary figure, but also as a historian. So when I began to teach in the early 1990s, I taught Václav Havel in a lot of my classes. So I've been a longtime fan of Václav Havel. And I came to him through just reading about Havel, but also watching him on television and watching the miracle unfold that you describe in your book.
I noticed at the beginning of your film, as we're about to see, you've got images from the Cold War. One of the most joyous aspects of being in Prague in the Velvet Revolution, and of the Velvet Revolution, it was the final nail in the Cold War. It meant that nuclear Armageddon was averted, and we were given our futures back again. Did you feel that as, quite profoundly at the time as well, James?
Yeah, I think, you know, when we grew up in the Cold War, those kids sliding under the desk that you're going to see, those are Czech kids or Czechoslovakian kids in the movie, but we were also doing that where I was growing up. I grew up in Montana, and there were missile silos all around me, and there's an Air Force base in Montana. So we were aware that we could be hit at any moment with atomic weapons. We knew that the Cold War could destroy the planet. And so when the Cold War began to end, we kind of were filled with a joy and an optimism that we had a future. It's kind of, and we talked about this a little bit before, but it's a little bit like the people who are now confronting climate change for the first time. There's an imminent threat, and if we don't deal with it in a sophisticated way, we're going to pay for it. And in this case, in the Cold War, we averted it, at least initially. And you know, we grew up writing and thinking about democracy as something that was achievable, not just for America, but for other places. And then at the end of this movie, and end of making this movie, you know, we have an insurrection in the United States. So I think our belief in democracy has been a little bit shaken, at least in America. And we're still fighting for that dream. And I think that what the Czechs did, or the Czechoslovakian people did in 1989 was incredible. And Václav Havel still seems to me one of the paramount figures who was able to communicate ideas and bring them into practical arenas in politics. And I think that's a really rare trait now, an incredibly rare trait. And the people in the audience, I really wish I could be there with you, because it's something that it's a joyful thing that we need to think about a lot about, especially as, you know, issues in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic today, and also in America, make us rethink that commitment to democracy. We have to fight for it.
Though we can talk about it being a time of miracles, as you say, there was no certainty at the time that what was about to happen did indeed happen. So it did feel like a miracle at the time. Do you think the importance of people like Václav Havel and Nelson Mandela and other people like him is that they have that magical quality to them? They make the impossible possible suddenly.
Yeah, there's no question that two of them to me are the two most important figures in my lifetime. And I think they're very parallel. The achievements of Václav Havel and the achievements of Nelson Mandela are really the two achievements that I look to when I teach the histories of oppression, or the histories of communism, or the history of authoritarianism. They're the two figures I teach a lot about. And they were equally weighted in world history. But, you know, it's important to talk about the fact that they were both writers. They both weren't from prison. They both learned in prison. And the learning that they did in prison prepared them for leadership posts. That's a really important lesson. And it's something I talk about in the movie. But that experience, that the reason they're so important is because they took those experiences from prison and decided not to replicate those experiences that put them in prison. And it's a super important lesson. In other words, they took the misery and oppression and turned it into something beautiful. And that's a rare trait.
James, you finished this film just as COVID was hitting the world. So I understand this is the first cinema screening of your movie, The Art of Dissent. Congratulations to you. Wish you all the best. Hope you hang around to watch the film. I don't know if you've seen it before. I expect new things might be revealed by it. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank the director, James Sueur.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Enjoy the movie.